She changed the locks before the dirt on our parents' graves had settled. I was standing on the porch of the house I had lived in for 33 years, with my work boots still muddy from the cattle lot, and my sister, who had not spent a full night on that farm in 20 years, had changed the locks. 6 days. That was how long it had been since we buried Mama and Daddy. 6 days since I stood between two caskets under a gray Virginia sky and tried to remember how to breathe. 6 days since I held my mother's hand for the last time at Valley Regional Medical Center. 6 days before Rochelle decided grief was over and ownership had begun. She stood behind the screen door wearing Mama's blue housecoat and holding Mama's coffee mug, the one with the chipped handle Daddy had glued twice because Mama refused to throw it away. "Aaliyah," she said, "you need to understand something. The house is mine now." I looked at the shiny new brass deadbolt. It looked wrong on that old white door. You changed the lock." I had to secure my property. My property. The porch boards under my feet were the same boards Daddy taught me to sweep when I was 7. The window boxes held rosemary Mama planted with her own hands. The pasture behind the house held cattle I had fed that morning. The orchard rows behind the barn ran straight toward the Blue Ridge because Daddy believed straight rows were a form of prayer. Rochelle had been home less than a week. She told me the house, the land, the equipment, the money, all $28 million of it, belonged to her. She wanted me gone by morning. But here is what my sister did not know, what none of us knew until Harold Pierce opened the second envelope. My name is Aaliyah Freeman. I was 33 years old, a black farm accountant in rural Virginia, and I had spent my adult life keeping Freeman Farm alive, while my sister treated it like an old picture she could sell when the frame became valuable. If you have ever been the one who stayed, the one who did the quiet work, the one everybody mistook for hired help because you did not make a performance out of loyalty, stay with me. Tell me in the comments what you built while someone else was busy judging it, because this story turns on one changed lock, one set of ledgers, and a second envelope my parents left behind for exactly this moment. And if someone needs to remember that ownership is not the same as stewardship, send this to them. Freeman Farm sat on 250 acres outside of Cedar Vale, Virginia, apple orchards, cattle pasture, a creek that crossed the back 40, cold and stubborn, cutting through limestone the way truth cuts through a family story if you give it enough time. My great-grandfather bought the first 50 acres in 1949, which was not an easy thing for a black man to do in that county. He had served in the war, come home with a limp, a little saved money, and a refusal to spend the rest of his life asking permission to plant somebody else's land. People called him foolish. Then they called him stubborn. Then, when the trees started bearing and the cattle started paying, they called him Mr. Freeman. That is how land changes a name in people's mouths. My grandfather added pasture. My father, Walter Freeman, added the cold storage facility, signed co-op contracts, bought better equipment, and turned the farm from a family operation into something that employed 11 people during harvest season and kept 3 neighboring families paid through the lean months. My mother, Denise, kept the books until arthritis bent her fingers and made her handwriting shake. Then she taught me. I learned numbers at the kitchen table, beside jars of peach preserves and stacks of receipts held together with rubber bands. Money tells the truth if you stop letting people talk over it, Mama used to say. I believed her. I went to Virginia Tech, got my accounting degree, and came back at 23 because the farm needed someone who understood both soil and spreadsheets. I never left again. For 10 years, I ran the books. Every bushel of apples, every head of cattle, every equipment lease, every feed invoice, every co-op payment, every insurance premium. I knew which orchard blocks underperformed after a wet spring. I knew which tractor had a transmission that lied until the weather got cold. I knew which customers paid late but eventually paid, and which ones needed a phone call before the due date because kindness without records is how farms die. My sister Rochelle was 5 years older. She left the day after she turned 18 in a red hatchback with a cracked windshield and a boyfriend Daddy did not like. She stood in the driveway wearing sunglasses too big for her face and said, "I am not wasting my life picking apples." Mama did not cry, not where Rochelle could see. She wiped her hands on her apron, went inside, and started a batch of biscuits because some women keep from breaking by measuring flour. Rochelle moved first to Raleigh, then Richmond, then wherever the next man or next dream or next disappointment pointed her. Fashion school, real estate classes, a boutique that never opened, 2 marriages, 1 divorce that cost our parents more than Rochelle admitted, then Malcolm Hayes, who had been everything from a sales consultant to an investment strategist depending on who was listening. She sent Christmas cards with printed signatures and photos taken in places she rented by the weekend. She did not come for harvest. She did not come when Mama had her first hand surgery. She did not come when Daddy fell off the hay wagon and cracked 2 ribs. But she called. Always when she needed money. $500, $2,000, emergency rent, legal fees, a business opportunity, a car repair. My parents never said no. I asked Daddy once, after Rochelle's third last-time loan, why he kept sending money to someone who treated the farm like a place she had escaped. He looked out toward the orchard for a long while. "Because she is still my daughter, Leah," he said, "even when she acts like she is not." That was Daddy. Loyal past reason, tender under the discipline. He could lift a calf by himself if he had to, but he saved every birthday card either of us ever gave him in a shoebox in the closet. The call came on a Tuesday in November. I was at the kitchen table closing the monthly expense reports. Rain tapped against the windows. Mama had gone with Daddy to the county farmers market that morning because they still liked talking to customers, even after I told them both they should be semi-retired. The landline rang. No one used that phone anymore except the county extension office, 2 elderly neighbors, and robocalls about car warranties. I answered with a pen still in my hand. Freeman Farm. It was the state police. There are voices you remember forever because they split your life in 2. My parents had been driving home on Route 29. A deer jumped the road. Daddy swerved. The truck hit a guardrail, rolled down an embankment, and landed on its side near a stand of cedar trees. Daddy was gone before the ambulance arrived. Mama made it to Valley Regional. I sat beside her bed for 4 hours with her hand between mine. Her fingers were cool. The arthritis had left her knuckles swollen, but I still knew the shape of them. Those hands had braided my hair, kneaded dough, signed payroll checks, and tapped mistakes on ledger pages until I learned to find them myself. She never woke up. At 2:12 in the morning, I stood in the hospital parking lot under a light that buzzed like an insect and called Rochelle. Her phone rang 6 times. When she answered, her voice was thick with sleep and irritation. "What?" "Rochelle, it's Mama and Daddy." She was quiet. Then the first thing she said was, "Is there life insurance?" Not what happened. Not are they alive. Life insurance. I remember looking down at my shoes because if I looked up at the sky, I thought I might come apart. "They're gone," I said. 3 seconds of silence. Then, "What about the house?" I handled everything alone. Funeral home, flowers, obituary, calls to family, Pastor Milton Graves at New Hope Baptist, the co-op, the feed supplier, the equipment rental company, payroll, insurance. The cattle did not care that my parents had died. They still needed feed. The cold storage facility did not care that I had cried in the truck until my ribs hurt. It still needed temperature checks. Grief does not pause a farm. It just walks beside you while you do the chores. Rochelle said she would come right away. She arrived 3 days later. She brought Malcolm. They pulled up in a rental sedan that looked too clean for our gravel driveway. Malcolm got out first, squinting at the fields with his phone already in his hand. He turned in a slow circle like he was standing at an auction. That was when I knew. This was not a reunion. It was an appraisal. Rochelle stepped out in a black designer coat and heels that sank into the gravel. She looked toward the house, then the barn, then the orchard rows, not with grief, but with assessment. I walked toward her because some childish part of me still thought death might make sisters into sisters again. She did not hug me. She brushed past me into the foyer. "This place has not changed," she said. "Still smells like hay and old wood." I stood behind her, one hand on the doorframe. Mama loved that smell. Rochelle did not answer. Malcolm wandered toward the barn. I watched him pace near the fence line, phone raised, thumb moving. He stopped at the post where Daddy had carved our initials when we were little. RFAF Rochelle told everyone later she came home heartbroken. That is not how she entered the house. She entered like someone checking square footage. The first night she did not ask where Mama kept her medication list or whether Daddy had finished the winter feed order. She asked which parcels had road frontage. I was in the kitchen making coffee because the house was full of relatives and no one had eaten properly since the accident. Rochelle stood by the window with Malcolm, looking toward the south pasture. "Is that all ours too?" she asked. "Ours?" The word sounded strange in her mouth. "It is part of the farm," I said. "Could it be divided?" I set the coffee pot down. "Daddy would have hated that question." She rolled her eyes. "Daddy hated lots of practical things." Malcolm was already zooming in on a satellite map. He asked whether the county had sewer expansion plans, whether the creek created restrictions, whether the cold storage facility had separate utility access. These were not grief questions, these were development questions. I answered very little, but I wrote them down later. Time, location, comments about parcel division, questions about utilities and zoning before will reading. At the time it felt obsessive. By Tuesday it felt necessary. The funeral was on Sunday. The church was full because my parents had belonged to more people than I understood. Farmers, co-op workers, church ladies, former seasonal workers, teachers from the school agriculture program Daddy volunteered with, men who had once bought apples from him and ended up standing at the fence talking for an hour. Rochelle cried at the right times. She wore a veil. She let people hold her hands. I do not judge that. Grief wears strange clothes. But after the burial, while I was helping Nana Pearl into the church hall, I saw Malcolm near the parking lot talking to Pastor Milton Graves with his phone out. Pastor Graves looked uncomfortable, then interested, then careful. I could not hear what they said. Later, I learned enough. By Monday afternoon, Rochelle was in the living room with a legal pad. "We need to talk about the estate," she said. I was standing by the mantel, still wearing the black dress I had worn to the funeral because I had not had the strength to change out of it. "The will reading is next Tuesday. We do not need to wait for that." "Yes, we do." Rochelle looked at Malcolm. He leaned back in Daddy's recliner, which made something hot move through me. "Your parents told her things," he said. "It is usually pretty clear in families like this." Families like this. I looked at him. "And what kind of family is this?" He smiled. "The kind where the eldest inherits." Rochelle nodded like he had cited law instead of ego. "I am the oldest. Daddy always said the farm had to stay in the family." "It is in the family." Her eyes moved over me. "You know what I mean." I did. That was the problem. She meant her, not the one who stayed, not the one who knew the books, not the one who held Mama's hand while she died. Her, because she had decided being oldest outranked being present. She slid a paper across the coffee table. It was not a will. It was a typed summary Malcolm had apparently created based on things Rochelle believed: family home, agricultural land, equipment, liquid accounts, estimated value $28 million. Primary heir, Rochelle Freeman Hayes. I read that last line twice. This is not a legal document. It is a plan. A plan based on what? Common sense. Have you seen the will? She waved one hand. I do not need to see it. I already know what it says. Then she leaned forward. Let me be clear about something, Aaliyah. You were never the owner here. You were the help. The words landed like a slap, not because they surprised me, because she believed them. 20 years gone, and my sister had convinced herself that the black woman who stayed on her own family's land, who balanced the books, fixed contracts, paid workers, sat beside our mother's hospital bed, and buried our father, was staff. I did not raise my voice. Then you will not mind waiting for Harold Pierce to read the will officially. There is nothing to wait for. I walked out of the living room before my grief became language I could not take back. By the time I reached the kitchen, I heard her on the phone with a locksmith. The next morning, my key did not turn. I stood on the porch with a bucket of feed receipts under one arm and tried it twice before my mind accepted what my hand already knew. New lock, brass, fresh metal smell, out of place on that old door. I knocked. Rochelle opened the screen door with Mama's mug in her hand. "Oh," she said, "you are still here? You changed the lock. I thought you would have figured things out by now. I have lived in this house for 33 years. Lived, she said. Past tense. Behind her, Malcolm laughed under his breath. The house is mine now, Rochelle said. You can be out by morning. I will give you that much. That much. From the sister who had not known where we kept the spare light bulbs since 2004. I went around through the mudroom door because she had forgotten that one stuck unless you lifted it while turning the knob. That detail almost made me smile. Possession is not knowledge. In my room, I packed 2 suitcases, clothes, laptop, accounting files, USB drive with 10 years of farm records, 3 binders of printed ledgers, my parents' framed photo from my nightstand, the shoebox of Daddy's old seed tags that I could not explain needing and could not leave. Rochelle watched from the hallway. You do not need all that paperwork. I do. It is farm property. It is farm record. Same thing. No, I said. It really is not. I carried everything across the yard to the barn apartment. My parents had converted the space above the equipment shed years earlier for seasonal workers. 1 room, kitchenette, bathroom with a rust-stained sink, a cot that complained when you sat on it, and 1 window facing the orchard. I set my bags down and stood in the doorway looking back at the main house. Lights were on in every room. Music played from inside, something loud and sharp that had never belonged there. Through the kitchen window, I heard Rochelle's voice. Call the realtor, she told Malcolm. I want this place listed by Friday. I closed the barn apartment door. Then I cleaned the workbench Daddy built, set up my laptop, and made a spreadsheet. Not an emotional one, a financial one. When things fall apart, I make columns. At 7 the next morning, I called Harold Pierce. Harold had been our family attorney for 25 years. He was a precise man, not warm, not cold, just exact. He had handled land leases, tax issues, liability forms for county fair events, and the time Daddy had to fight an insurance company over hail damage. His assistant answered and said, "Mr. Pierce has been expecting your call." That phrase made my shoulders tighten. Harold picked up on the first ring. Aaliyah. When is the official will reading? Next Tuesday at 10. All parties must be present. All parties. He said it like the phrase had weight. Is there anything I need to know before then? Silence. Then, bring your records. My records? 10 years of bookkeeping, contracts, invoices, co-op reports, payroll, anything you maintained in the ordinary course of farm operations. My mouth went dry. Harold, what is going on? Be there Tuesday, he said, and keep doing what you have always done. That was not an answer. It was better than one. For the next 4 days, I kept the farm alive from the barn, fed cattle, checked fences, monitored cold storage, updated harvest projections, paid the diesel invoice, called the vet about a calf with a cough, emailed the co-op. Rochelle could change a lock. She could not make the farm stop needing the person who knew where the shutoff valve was. She did try to make it look like she was managing. On Sunday afternoon, she posted a photo from the porch on social media. Mama's rocking chair was behind her. Daddy's pasture was blurred in the background. Her caption said, "Coming home to honor my parents' legacy. Hard decisions ahead, but I will protect what is ours." Protect. Within an hour, people were commenting with hearts and prayers. A cousin wrote, "So proud of you for stepping up." Someone from Rochelle's city life wrote, "Boss woman energy." Malcolm shared it with a caption about generational wealth and strategic land use. I read the post from the barn apartment while entering the feed bill. Then I looked out at Luis repairing a fence line in the cold because a calf had pushed through. That was the difference between performance and stewardship. Performance took a porch photo. Stewardship found the broken wire before sunset. I screenshotted the post, not because it hurt my feelings, though it did, but because Malcolm's phrase, strategic land use, meant he was already telling people what he planned before anyone had authority to plan it. Saturday morning, she cornered 2 workers near the loading shed. Luis had worked harvest for 7 years, Darnell for 5. Both had stayed on through November to help with cattle and repairs. Luis came to the barn apartment with his hat in his hands. "Miss Aaliyah?" he said. "Your sister says we are done, says the farm is being sold." I felt something cold settle under my ribs. "Nothing is sold," she said, effective today. "Do not sign anything she gives you." "Give me until Tuesday." He looked toward the house. "I got a family." "I know. I cannot promise what probate will do, but I can promise she has not read the will and she does not have authority today." He nodded slowly. "Your daddy always said you were the one to ask." That almost broke me. I waited until he left, then I wrote everything down. Date, time, witness, statement. Rochelle attempted termination of seasonal workers before a state authority established. Documentation is not petty. Documentation is memory with shoes on. By noon, Patrice Coleman from the Agricultural Co-op called. Patrice ran the Blue Ridge Agricultural Cooperative with a voice that could make grown men locate missing paperwork in under 10 minutes. She had known my parents for years and me since I was a girl sitting under Mama's desk with a coloring book while adults talked bushels and rates. Patrice was not sentimental about farms. That was why I trusted her. She had seen family operations fall apart because one heir loved the land, one loved the money, and 3 more loved the idea of being wronged. She had watched orchards sold to developers, cattle dispersed at auction, workers left unpaid because siblings were too busy fighting over who got the dining room set. Years earlier, after Daddy's first health scare, Patrice pulled me aside at a co-op meeting. "Aaliyah, do your parents have their succession paperwork clean?" "They have a will." "A will is a start. A farm needs more than a start." I told Mama that night. She listened without saying much. Daddy grunted the way he did when good advice irritated him because he knew it was good. 2 weeks later, they had an appointment with Harold. I did not know then that Patrice's question had helped push my parents toward the trust. Sitting in the barn after Rochelle's call to the co-op, I understood why Harold wanted Patrice in the room. She was not there to take sides. She was there because the farm had a public record, and I was part of it. "Aaliyah," she said, "your sister called." I figured she might. "She demanded we freeze all standing contracts until she reviews them." I closed my eyes. "She has no authority to do that." That is what I told her. "Thank you." She also said you had been manipulating your parents and misrepresenting farm income. There it was. The story. Rochelle had been home less than a week and had already found the oldest weapon. If you cannot beat the woman with records, accuse her of creating the records falsely. "Patrice." "I know," she said. "I have seen your books. Still, I wanted you to know what she is saying." "I appreciate that. Bring copies Tuesday." I went still. "You know about Tuesday?" A pause. "Harold asked me to attend." "All parties." The phrase got heavier. On Monday morning, I drove to the co-op to drop off the weekly production report. Same route, same clipboard, same loading dock crew? But people looked at me differently. Not unfriendly, careful, the way people look at a woman surrounded by rumors they have not yet decided to believe. At booth 6, Mrs. Hattie, who sold jams and had known me since I wore braids with beads, leaned over her table. "Baby, I heard your sister is having a hard time getting what is rightfully hers." I set the clipboard under my arm. "Where did you hear that?" She looked embarrassed. "Around." "Around named Rochelle?" Mrs. Hattie's mouth pressed into a line. "And that Malcolm man, he put something online too. Said one sibling was hoarding the family farm while the other only wanted fairness." Fairness. People love that word when they are trying to take what they did not tend. I did not post back. I did not defend myself in the parking lot. I went back to the truck, drove home, and checked the mailbox at the end of the driveway. Most of it was sympathy cards and junk mail. Then I saw the envelope. Piedmont Ridge Development, Charlottesville, Virginia. It was addressed to Rochelle Freeman Hayes, owner, Freeman Farm. I opened it on the tailgate. Inside was a letter of intent offering $22 million for 250 acres of agricultural land, cold storage facility included, subject to title verification and zoning review. Rochelle had signed the bottom, owner. I read it twice. Then I called Harold. He listened without interrupting. She signed a development letter, I said, for land she does not own. Keep that document. Can she do anything with it? Until probate is complete and the will is executed, she has no legal authority to sell, transfer, or encumber estate property. His voice stayed calm. The words did not. Harold, she is trying to sell the farm before the will reading. I understand. Do my parents? There was a long silence. Tuesday, he said. Everything becomes clear Tuesday. That was the second time he had said it like that. Tuesday like a door. Monday night, Malcolm came to the barn apartment without knocking. The door scraped open while I was reviewing quarterly tax estimates. He stood in the doorway in a leather jacket and polished shoes that had no business near a barn. Got a minute? No. He smiled and walked in anyway. Rochelle and I want to make this easy. For who? Everyone. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket and laid it on the workbench. $50,000, clean break. Sign over any claim to the estate and vacate all farm property by close of business Wednesday. I looked at the number, then at him. The cold storage equipment is worth more than that. You are not getting the cold storage equipment. You do not know what I am getting. His smile thinned. Be realistic. You are living in a barn. You were the bookkeeper. That is it. The family let you stay because it was convenient. There it was again. Bookkeeper, hired help, convenient. They all had the same language because they had the same lie. I guess we will let the will decide, I said. Malcolm's face changed. The salesman fell off. Under it was something smaller and meaner. You really want to drag this out? Rochelle and I know attorneys in Raleigh who can bury a little farm accountant in paperwork until you cannot afford to answer. Tuesday, I said. You keep saying Tuesday like it saves you. No, I said. I keep saying Tuesday because that is when the law speaks. He stared at me. Then he snatched the paper off the bench and walked out hard enough to rattle the door in its frame. I sat very still for a while after he left. Then I wrote down every word I could remember. Time, threat, offer amount, witness, none. I had no witness. I had notes. Sometimes notes are what you have until truth gathers friends. That night, I found Mama's letter. I had been looking under the cot for a dropped pen. My fingers brushed an envelope taped to the underside of the wooden frame. My name was on it, Aaliyah, Mama's handwriting. My breath stopped. I sat on the floor with the envelope in my lap for 5 minutes before I opened it. Inside was one page. Baby, if you are reading this from the barn apartment, then your sister has done what your father and I feared she might do. Do not argue with the lock. Locks are noise. Records are truth. Trust what you have built here. Bring the books. Love, Mama. That was all. No explanation, no comfort, no warning about what the will said. Just Mama, practical to the end. Do not argue with the lock. Locks are noise. Records are truth. I folded the letter and put it in my shirt pocket. Then I slept for the first time since the funeral. Tuesday morning came cold and clear. Frost silvered the grass near the barn. The cattle moved slow in the pasture, breath rising white. The main house had every light on though the sun was up. Rochelle and Malcolm's rental car idled in the drive. Rochelle came out wearing a black fitted dress, sunglasses and boots that had never touched mud before that week. She looked like she was going to court. Or television. Malcolm wore a sport coat tight in the shoulders, and a tie I suspected still had a store crease. They looked like people who had already won. My phone buzzed. Miss Laverne Johnson. She had been Mama's best friend since childhood, the kind of woman who could correct your grammar and your morals in the same sentence. You ready, baby? As ready as I can be. Your Mama and I used to say the truth does not need a loud voice, just a patient one. I read that twice. Then I grabbed the binder, the USB drive, the development letter, Mama's note, and the payroll records. Harold Pierce's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Main Street, above a hardware store that still sold nails by the pound. The hallway smelled like old carpet, coffee, and copy toner. I had been there dozens of times for farm contracts. Never like this. The conference room door was open. Harold stood at the head of the table with a leather briefcase and a glass of water. He wore a charcoal suit and the expression of a man who had already checked every comma. "Aaliyah," he said. Miss Laverne was already seated near the window, hands folded over her purse. Patrice Coleman sat beside her with a tablet and a stack of co-op documents. They both looked at me. Miss Laverne nodded once. Steady. Pastor Milton Graves arrived next. He slid into a chair near the door, hat in his lap, eyes lowered. I had not expected him, but I understood quickly enough. If Malcolm had been making promises through him, Harold wanted him present when the truth arrived. Rochelle and Malcolm came in 7 minutes late. Rochelle stopped in the doorway. "Why are they here?" She was looking at Miss Laverne and Patrice. Harold answered, "They are named in the documents." Rochelle's jaw tightened. Malcolm gave her a tiny shrug that meant, "Do not worry." That shrug aged badly. Rochelle sat at the center of the table, crossed her legs, placed her hands flat, and looked around the room like she was chairing the meeting. Harold opened his briefcase. He removed a stack of documents thicker than Rochelle expected. Tabbed, bound, witness seals visible. Her left eye twitched. "Before we begin," Harold said, "I want to clarify that Walter and Denise Freeman's estate plan has 2 parts. We will read part 1 first." 2 parts. The room shifted. Rochelle had changed locks, called a realtor, fired workers, signed a development letter, and offered me $50,000 before learning there was a second part. If you have ever watched someone underestimate you because you stayed quiet, you know the exact taste of that moment. Keep listening and leave a comment if you have your own version, because what Harold read next changed every lie my sister had been telling. Harold adjusted his glasses. Last Will and Testament of Walter James Freeman and Denise Elaine Freeman. Part 1. Direct Bequests. His voice was dry, clear, and impossible to rush. To our daughter, Rochelle Freeman Hayes, we leave the family home located at 1847 Orchard Lane, including all furnishings and personal property therein, and the sum of $280,000 from the joint savings account at Valley National Bank. Rochelle exhaled sharply. She turned toward me with a look that said, "See." Malcolm squeezed her hand under the table. Pastor Graves nodded once, as if the universe had confirmed his side. Harold continued. "This bequest is subject to the following condition. Rochelle Freeman Hayes must reside at the property and maintain it in good condition for a period of no less than 5 years from the date of probate acceptance. Failure to meet this condition will result in the property reverting to the Freeman Family Trust." Rochelle's smile cracked. 5 years? Harold looked up. "Oh, yes. I am not living there for 5 years. Malcolm leaned toward her. "We will handle that later." "What else?" Rochelle asked. Harold folded the page. "That concludes part 1. Rochelle blinked. "That's it? For direct bequests? Yes. The farm is worth millions." "Correct. Where is the land?" Malcolm sat forward. "The equipment, the mineral rights, the cold storage, the contracts. There are over 20 million in assets." Harold did not react to Malcolm knowing the asset list too well for a grieving in-law. "Those are addressed in part 2. Rochelle and Malcolm looked at each other. Calculation moved between them. Not grief. Math. Harold turned the page. Part 2. The Freeman Family Irrevocable Trust. Irrevocable. The word sat down in the room like a judge. 7 years prior to their deaths, Walter and Denise Freeman established the Freeman Family Irrevocable Trust. The trust holds the agricultural acreage, operating equipment, cold storage facility, livestock, orchard contracts, water rights, mineral rights, and associated business accounts. The trust purpose is to preserve farm operations, support local agricultural employment, maintain land stewardship, and administer the Freeman Educational Fund for rural students. Rochelle's face changed slowly. First confusion, then irritation, then the first shadow of fear. They put the farm in a trust. Yes. Without telling me? Harold looked at her. They were not required to tell you. Malcolm said, "Can they do that?" Patrice made a sound so small it might have been a cough. Harold continued, "The trust designates a trustee responsible for managing all trust assets, maintaining farm operations, preserving co-op agreements, and administering educational disbursements." Rochelle straightened. "That's me." No one spoke. "I am the eldest daughter," she said. Obviously they meant me. Harold looked over his glasses. "Let me finish reading." He read the trustee qualifications one by one. The trustee must have resided on Freeman Farm property continuously for at least 5 years immediately prior to the grantors' deaths. Silence. Rochelle had not lived there in 20 years. The trustee must have maintained verifiable financial records of farm operations, including payroll, tax filings, co-op contracts, vendor accounts, insurance schedules, and agricultural production records. I felt my binder under my hand. The trustee must demonstrate active participation in the local agricultural community, verified by the Blue Ridge Agricultural Cooperative or successor organization. Patrice sat up straighter. The room did the math. Rochelle did not live on the farm. Rochelle had no records. Rochelle had no co-op standing beyond one angry phone call. She met none of the conditions. "This is ridiculous," Rochelle said. "Who wrote those conditions?" "Your parents," Harold said, "with my counsel." Malcolm stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. "This is biased. These conditions were written to exclude Rochelle. The conditions were written to identify the person capable of performing the trust's purpose. We will contest it." Harold's voice did not change. "An irrevocable trust established while both grantors were of sound mind, witnessed by independent parties, notarized, funded, and operated for 7 years, is not easily disturbed because an heir dislikes the qualifications." He looked toward Miss Laverne and Patrice. "The witnesses to the trust execution are present." Rochelle turned toward them. Miss Laverne met her eyes. Patrice did too. They had not just been invited, they had been there 7 years ago. They had watched my parents protect the farm from exactly this room. Rochelle's chair hit the wall behind her. She was on her feet, hands flat on the table. "This is a setup. Aaliyah manipulated them. She kept them isolated out here and poisoned them against me." I did not move. Mama's letter was in my pocket. "Let the papers do the talking." Miss Laverne spoke first, quiet as church. "Walter and Denise drove themselves to my house every Sunday for dinner for 20 years. Nobody isolated them." Patrice followed. "And Aaliyah has run these books clean for a decade. I have reviewed her records annually through the co-op process, every penny accounted for, every contract honored, every filing on time." Rochelle pointed at me. "She controlled what they saw." Miss Laverne shook her head. "Your mama controlled herself just fine, child." That landed harder than yelling could have. Rochelle's mouth opened. No words came. Pastor Graves had started sinking into his chair. His face had gone ashy. He had bet on the wrong version of the family. Worse, he had helped spread it. A shepherd should know the difference between a lost sheep and a wolf in a black dress, but promises have a way of fogging a man's glasses. Harold waited until the room settled. Then he said, "There is one more section before the addendum. Trustee designation." My heart began to pound so hard I heard it in my ears. Harold turned the page. "The designated trustee of the Freeman Family Irrevocable Trust is Aaliyah Renee Freeman." Silence. Not surprise, exactly. I think everyone except Rochelle and Malcolm had already understood, but hearing my name still changed the air. My face went hot, not with victory, with recognition. For 10 years I had wondered in small private ways whether staying made me less, whether I had mistaken duty for destiny, whether my parents saw my labor as love or simply got used to receiving it. Now I knew. They saw enough to build legal language around it. "No," Rochelle said. Her voice had shrunk. No, that cannot be right. It is right, Harold said. She gets $28 million and I get a house with rules? The trust assets are not personal spending money for Aaliyah. They are held for farm operations and community purposes. She manages them as trustee. Same thing. It is not the same thing. That was when I spoke for the first time. It is not mine to spend, Rochelle. She looked at me like she had forgotten I could talk. Do not pretend you are not loving this. I am trying to understand it. You knew. I did not. Liar, Harold interjected. Aaliyah was not informed of the trust terms before this reading. Malcolm recovered enough to reach for anger. This is all paper games. We have a development offer already. $22 million. Cash out opportunity. No farm accountant is going to turn that down. Harold became very still. What development offer? I opened my folder and slid the Piedmont Ridge letter across the table. This was in the mailbox yesterday. Harold read it, then read it again. His eyes moved to Rochelle's signature. Rochelle, did you sign this? She swallowed. It is just a letter of intent. Representing yourself as owner of property you did not legally control. Malcolm said, everyone does preliminary letters. Harold looked at him. Everyone does not misrepresent estate property ownership before probate. Malcolm's face reddened. She signed it, not me. Rochelle turned on him. You told me to. You said it was standard. I said after we confirmed. No, you said eldest child inherits automatically. There it was. The partnership cracked right down the middle. The same two people who had moved through my parents' house like conquerors were suddenly pointing at each other over a piece of paper. I sat still. I did not need to help them unravel. They were doing excellent work on their own. Harold placed the letter in a separate folder. This may need to be forwarded for review. Review by who? Malcolm asked. The proper authorities, depending on representations made to the developer. Pastor Graves put his head in his hands. Rochelle looked smaller now. Not sorry. Not yet. Just less certain. Then Harold said the line that stopped the room. Rochelle, are you sure you understand the will? He did not say it cruelly. He did not raise his voice. That made it worse. It was a precise question, the kind that only matters when the answer is no. Rochelle stared at him. What is there to understand? You rigged it for her. No, Harold said. Your parents structured it this way for reasons they asked me to read aloud. He reached into his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. Cream paper. My mother's handwriting on the front. To be read to both daughters. My breath caught. The second envelope. The room went still in a different way. Not legal still. Sacred still. Two people who were gone had found one last way to speak. Harold opened the envelope carefully. His hand trembled once at the edge of the page. He had known my parents for decades. This was not just paperwork to him. He began, To our daughters, we love you both. If this letter is being read, then the estate plan we made has become necessary. Rochelle looked down. I pressed Mama's barn letter through my shirt pocket. Rochelle, Harold read, we gave you freedom. We gave you money for apartments, cars, fresh starts, school attempts, business ideas, and the space to leave because you told us staying here felt like a cage. We did not always understand your choices, but we tried to love you without making you become someone you were not. Rochelle's face tightened. Aaliyah, we gave you roots, not because we loved you less, because you chose them. You came home with your degree and treated this farm like a living thing. You kept the books, checked the contracts, learned the soil, protected the workers, and stayed when staying was not easy. My eyes burned. Harold continued. Rochelle, the house and account are yours under conditions because we do not want you homeless, and we do not want to punish you for leaving. The 5-year residency requirement is not a trap. It is an invitation. Come home. Learn what your grandfather built. Learn what your sister has carried. If you stay and maintain the house, it remains yours. If you cannot love it enough to live in it, then it returns to the trust and will serve children from this county. Miss Laverne was crying silently. Patrice's jaw was tight. Even Malcolm had stopped performing. We would rather give the house to strangers who will love it than watch it be sold by a daughter who does not know where the well pump is. A sound left Rochelle, half anger, half grief. Harold read on, "Aaliyah, the trust is not a reward, it is a responsibility. We name you trustee because you have already been doing the work. Since you were 23, you have kept this farm honest and alive. We could not say this plainly while we were alive without hurting your sister, but we can say it now. You are the one we trust." I covered my mouth. I had not realized until that moment how badly I needed them to say it. Not that I was better, not that Rochelle was less, just that they knew. "To both of you," Harold continued, "do not mistake money for inheritance. Money spends, land remembers, community remembers, work remembers. We hope one day you both understand that what we built was never meant to be a prize. It was meant to be cared for." He lowered the page. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Rochelle whispered, "They thought I would sell it." No one answered, because everyone knew. "They thought I would sell my own home." Miss Laverne's voice was gentle. "They hoped you would not." Rochelle looked at me. There was something raw in her face now, something younger than the woman who had changed the locks. For 1 second, I saw the sister who used to braid my hair on the porch steps before she learned to hate the smell of hay. Then Malcolm moved. "This is sentimental garbage," he snapped. "We need counsel." And just like that, Rochelle's face hardened again. Harold folded the letter. "You are entitled to seek independent counsel." "We will," Malcolm said. "Good. In the meantime, no sale, transfer, termination, or encumbrance of trust property is authorized by either of you." He looked directly at Rochelle. "That includes locks." Her cheeks flushed. She moved out. She was removed from her residence without estate authority. "It is my house. Subject to conditions and probate. Not yet." Rochelle looked like she wanted to say something cruel and could not find one that would survive the room. Pastor Graves stood abruptly. "I should go." Harold turned to him. "Pastor, one moment." The pastor froze. "I understand you may have made representations to community members regarding ownership and sale of the farm. I was offering spiritual support." Patrice's eyebrows rose. Harold said, "Be careful that your support does not become witness testimony." Pastor Graves went red. He put on his hat and left without another word. Rochelle and Malcolm left next. Not together. That mattered. He walked ahead, already on his phone. She paused at the door. "You are really going to keep me out?" "The door is open," I said. "If you come for the farm, not the money." She laughed once. It sounded empty. "You sound like them." "Maybe that is not the insult you think it is." She left. The room felt larger after they were gone. For a moment, it was just me, Harold, Miss Laverne, and Patrice. Miss Laverne came around the table and wrapped me in her arms. She was smaller than I remembered and stronger than she looked. "Your mama would be so proud," she whispered. "She planned this whole thing." Miss Laverne pulled back. "She planned it because she knew you would still be standing here when it mattered." Patrice did not hug me. Patrice shook my hand, firm and professional, the way we had done business for years. "The co-op contracts are safe?" "They are protected by the trust." "Good." Her eyes were red, but her grip did not waver. "Your parents built something that matters." Harold stood by the window, letting everyone else speak first. When I turned to him, he extended his hand. "Your parents were two of the smartest people I ever represented," he said, "and they were right about you." I walked out into cold November air carrying a binder, a USB drive, a legal responsibility worth more than any check I had ever imagined, and a letter that had given me something money could not, proof that staying had been seen. The drive back to Freeman Farm took 20 minutes, past the co-op, past New Hope Baptist, past the elementary school where Mama volunteered every September to teach children how apples grow. The truck smelled like hay, diesel, and the cracked leather seat Daddy never got around to fixing. When I pulled into the driveway, Rochelle and Malcolm's rental car was gone. The main house stood quiet. The brass lock still shone on the front door. I did not try my key. Not that day. I walked across the yard to the barn apartment, sat on the cot, and unfolded Mama's first note on the workbench. Do not argue with the lock. Locks are noise, records are truth. Through the window, the orchard rows ran toward the mountains. The cattle moved slowly in the pasture. The cold storage building caught low gold light. The creek in the back 40 kept moving like it had heard every human argument before and was unimpressed by all of them. My parents had not left me a pile of money. They had left me the work, the land, the people, the responsibility. And I understood sitting there in the barn my sister thought proved I had lost, that I had been ready for it my whole life. 3 months later, the dust had settled into new patterns. Rochelle lasted 2 weeks in the house. 2 weeks of heating oil bills, septic maintenance, neighbors who waved politely but did not stop, and a roof leak over the back bedroom she had never known existed. 2 weeks of realizing a farmhouse is not a backdrop. It is a system of chores with walls. She packed and drove back to Raleigh without saying goodbye. Under the will, she still had 5 years to meet the residency condition. Her clock was running. By February, the house was empty. By March, Harold began the paperwork for reversion. Probate is not fast, but the direction was clear. Malcolm had bigger problems. Harold forwarded the Piedmont Ridge letter to the county prosecutor's office for review. Misrepresentation in a commercial transaction is not a charming misunderstanding just because the person doing it wore a sport coat. Last I heard, Malcolm had hired an actual attorney and stopped calling himself an investment strategist online. Rochelle cut contact with him. Pastor Graves stepped down from the church board in January after enough people asked enough careful questions. New Hope Baptist elected a new head pastor, a younger woman from Staunton, who did not owe old favors and preached her first Sunday on Naboth's vineyard, which made half the congregation stare at their shoes. I moved back into the main house the week after Rochelle left. I changed the lock one final time, not because I needed to punish her with brass, because keys should belong to people who understand what a door protects. The first night back, I slept in my own room with both my parents' letters on the nightstand. I woke before sunrise, the way I always do, and for one confused second, I expected to hear Daddy coughing in the kitchen and Mama opening the silverware drawer. Grief hit me then. Not the sharp funeral grief. The daily kind. The kind that finds you when there is no one left to ask how much coffee to make. I cried in the hallway for a while. Then I fed the cattle. That is not repression. That is farming. The Freeman Educational Fund issued its first 3 scholarships in February, $15,000 each for rural students pursuing agriculture, land management, or community development degrees. I signed the checks at Mama's kitchen table with Harold present and Patrice on video call because I wanted every process clean from the beginning. One recipient was Luis's niece. She cried when she found out. Luis came by the next day with a sack of tamales his wife had made and stood awkwardly near the mudroom until I hugged him. "Your daddy would like this," he said. "Mama, too." "Yes." "Your mama would ask for the spreadsheet." We both laughed. The farm kept going. Spring pruning, calving, equipment maintenance, co-op renegotiations, a new payroll system, a land stewardship plan Patrice had wanted us to adopt for years, but Daddy kept putting off because he trusted his memory more than software. The trust did not make the work easier, it made the purpose clearer. Rochelle called once in March. I was on the porch watching winter light drain off the mountains, the kind of evening where the air feels blue before the sky looks it. Her number appeared on my phone. I almost let it ring out. Then I answered. She did not say hello. "Is there any way I can get more from the trust?" I looked toward the orchard. The trust is for the farm and the community. "So you are just going to sit on $27 million? "I am going to manage it, the way Mama and Daddy asked me to." Traffic moved in the background. Rochelle was always driving somewhere. "Aaliyah," she said. For a second her voice changed, younger, like the sister who used to sit behind me on the porch steps and braid my hair too tight while I complained, and she said, "Beauty cost something." "The door is open," I said quietly. She did not answer. "For real this time," I said. "Not for the money, for the farm. Mama and Daddy gave you 5 years." Silence. Then, "This is not fair." "Maybe not in the way you wanted." She hung up. I set the phone on the porch railing. The cattle were moving toward the barn for the night, slow dark shapes in fading light. I was not angry. I was not sad either. I was something else. Settled. The way land feels after a long rain. Not dry, not flooded, holding exactly what it needs. I stood on that porch until the first stars came out and looked at everything my parents had trusted me to protect. The orchard, the pasture, the creek, the barn apartment where I learned that being locked out of a house does not mean being locked out of your inheritance. My sister called me hired help. My parents called me trustee, and the difference between those two names changed my life. That is my story. A changed lock, a barn apartment, a developer letter, a second envelope, and a mother's note taped under a cot. If you have ever been the one who stayed while someone else left and came back only for the harvest, remember this: quiet work is still work, and the people who truly know what you built will not need you to shout it. Share this with someone who needs to hear that stewardship has value. Drop a comment, subscribe, and never let anyone confuse your loyalty with hired help.